Hi guys, happy Thursday and welcome back to the podcast. It's Chantal and this is the Sage Sorority. I hope everyone is having an amazing week so far. Today we are talking about 5 podcasts that have changed my life. As many of you know from the first episode where I briefly talked about it on the reset, podcasting has been part of my repertoire for quite some time. I have been an avid podcast listener on and off, but mostly on, I would say, since 2014, 2015. So it's been a really long time. And I attribute podcasting to a lot of my self-development and self-growth, knowledge, and just overall expansion of thoughts and ideas that have not come from the mainstream media, TV, radio, and books. And I'm just so grateful for that. I think podcasting is such an amazing medium, and obviously I'm participating in it now as both a consumer and a producer. Before I was solely a consumer, but I do think it's just a real cool way to translate ideas and thoughts and perspectives in a way that doesn't have as many filters, for good or for bad. When I say transform my life, I really mean shaping my idea, how I show up in the world, how I think, to what degree do I consider things, and in some ways how I run the Sage Sorority. So we're going to count these down from number 5 to my absolute number 1. I'm obviously going to share why they matter to me. I'll plug some of my favorite episodes and episodes that I think are worth listening to. And maybe if you like this podcast, you will like these. Send me a DM on Instagram and let me know if any podcasts have changed your life or any even specific podcast episodes you've listened to that have really been poignant for you in your journey. I would love to know. I'm always looking to expand my own podcast library. So if you have a good one, please share it with me. So coming in at number 5 is The Read. So if you haven't heard of The Read, you are honestly, where have you been? But also you're in for a treat because The Read is an OG podcast. So Kid Fury and Crystal have been going hard on The Read for over a decade now, which is very, very, very long in podcasting world. They launched back in 2013, which is like crazy because I can't even remember when I was doing in 2013, but it was definitely not listening to a podcast. And what I love about them is that they have remained completely and unapologetically themselves the entire time. I can't really think of a better example of 2 people who have quote unquote made their living on the internet, but have not really changed their disposition, their very strong opinions. They've never shied away from hard topics. I think when it comes to being able to truly make money for being yourself, which is my ultimate goal, they are 2 people that I think describe that and show that in the clearest sense. I think a lot of people, influencers, content creators, etc., say that they are making money for being themselves, but there's so much of themselves that is sent through many filters before the ultimate final product gets to us. And I feel like with Kid Fury and Crystal, it's not like that. It's 2 friends and they've been hosting the podcast together, the 2 of them, since 2013. They've had a few breaks here and there, but they've remained pretty consistent. Sometimes they have guests, but really it's just the 2 of them going back and forth. And they have literally built such an amazing brand and community. The lovers of The Read go deep and vast. They talk about everything from pop culture to politics, always centering back on Black perspectives and being from the LGBTQ plus community. They both identify as queer, I believe, and they do it with such humor and honesty and like zero filter, like truly zero filter. They also have amazing chemistry because they are friends IRL, which is always so easy to tell. People say it comes across camera, but it's just so easy to tell through audio that they are genuine friends, and that makes for such better episodes. And then the whole point of The Read is they end each show with basically reading someone to filth, which is both funny and cathartic and very necessary. It often leans political. Sometimes it's just pure humorous, but I think they do a really good balance of being funny, diving into pop culture, but also being a key voice for Black millennials you just don't see as often represented. They are a really good example of doing things their way and staying true to themselves. Podcast number 4 is This Is My League. So I'm sure you know My League Teal. If you don't, you need to. If you're into anything, personal development, growth, mastery, confidence, you definitely need to listen to My League. She is another one. Been doing it from the way ages. I want to say 2013, 2014, maybe even 2012. Again, just solo, her and a mic, talking about things that she thinks are relevant. I would say My League is like the fairy godmother in a podcast form. She has been showing up and really just like dropping a lot of gems for years now, over a decade. She is not new to this, very true to this. She was the founder and CEO of Curlbox. Curlbox was a monthly subscription service of basically hair products for curly girls. It was revolutionary at the time. Another example of someone doing things their way. She's offered a lot of like thorough, non-nonsense, no BS advice on everything from like entrepreneurship, relationships, personal development. She's really like a bigger sister and definitely an inspiration for this show, 1000%. One of my favorite episodes that she has is called Beyond Networking and Building Genuine Connections. And one of the key things that she says in it that it's something I related to so much was instead of worrying about networking up, you should be networking across. And I thought that was so poignant because in this day and age, we've really gone away from things like unpaid internships and maybe even full-time internships that are kind of a heavy grind and all that kind of stuff. You know, like back in the day, internships were basically borderline illegal. I think there's a lot more regulation and a lot more fairness around them now. But quote unquote, back in my day, you know, to have a cushy internship was a privilege. Most internships were quite a slog. And some of the best things out of the internships that I did were the people that I met. And often it wasn't my boss. It was definitely the people that I was slogging with because everyone is someone and maybe they just haven't had their time yet, but everyone is truly someone. And if you meet someone who's working hard and they're 19, 20, 21, just like you are, that person's probably going to end up somewhere favorable, just like you are. And it's so much more valuable to you to build a relationship with that person just because you have less social hoops to go through when you're networking across than you do networking up. And I just thought it was such a good point. And it's something that I kind of instinctively knew, but I had never articulated. And when she said it, it just really hit me. My lead covers a lot of good working topics. And I think if you are someone who's just getting out of school, building your career, or maybe you're looking to pivot, I think where she really shines, she gives great advice across the board, but her working corporate decorum and all that kind of stuff, that advice, I think she really nails. And there wasn't a lot of Black women at the time giving advice like that from someone who was actually doing it. So we're not talking about someone who's 20 years your senior. We're talking about someone who's only like 5 years your senior, in the thick of it, has covered a lot of different industries, has had the quote unquote cool job. At one point, she was doing PR for Pretty Ricky. She was Kim Zolciak's assistant on the very first season of Real Housewives. There's a clip when she's there. So she's done it. One of the poignant things that I remember her saying when she was doing PR for Pretty Ricky is it was like late at night and some award show or whatever, maybe BET Awards, but they were out somewhere late at night doing a red carpet. And she just had this epiphany that like, she doesn't want to do this for very long. And she doesn't want to do this if she has a family and things like that. And I think that being young and being in the job that everyone loves and still having enough kind of like foresight to be like, this is cool for now, but I need to migrate out of here. Otherwise it'll suck me in. I just think is so wise. And if that's one way I had to describe her, is definitely wisdom. So if you are looking for no nonsense wisdom, I highly recommend the My League Teal show. It's called This Is My League. Podcast number 3 is Dear Sugars with Cheryl Strayed and Steve Almond. So firstly, this podcast actually doesn't really exist anymore in the sense that they don't produce new episodes. I know it's kind of a cheat, but when I tell you that this is a life-changing podcast, I really, really, really mean it. And I'm still so eternally grateful that we have the archive to listen to. I love giving advice, obviously, and I love a good AMA, which is Ask Me Anything, because there's so much like gold and knowledge in our experience, right? And in sharing our experience. And one thing that I love about podcasting is that you are able to share a lot more of an unfiltered experience that doesn't have to be sifted through for this specific magazine and their tone of voice, or this specific newspaper and their readership. And what makes Dear Sugars so special is that they would discuss topics like things that are part of real life, but are maybe not the most like palatable or easy to answer. You know, everyone loves a good AMA when the answer is very simple, but what about things like dealing with the road not taken, grief? You know, Cheryl famously lost her mother at 19. She's the author of the book Wild. I believe Reese Witherspoon starred in the movie, and that's kind of how she became very famous. She was on Oprah's Super Soul Sunday. Cheryl is just chef's kiss. You know, talking about things like emotional labor far before it was the buzzword that it is now, infidelity, boundaries, like way before these things became typical, commonplace, and conversational topics. Not only that, Cheryl and Steve were so incredibly considerate, thoughtful, and gentle in their approach. They were never harsh about it, but they never straddled the line either, right? They didn't remain neutral. They definitely had an opinion, but they were the definition of holding space for multiple options and multiple considerations. It's just such a beautiful podcast. Like the way sometimes they would ask one question, they would spend the whole episode on that question. Like when I say thoughtful, I truly mean thoughtful. And one of the most impactful episodes for me was an episode called When Bad Things Happen. And there are two quotes from that episode that I literally wrote down and I keep in my notebook. And it was like, the question is not why did this happen, but what will I do with this now that it has? And there is no why, there is only what now. And if you are familiar with personal development, personal growth, you know, that kind of world, there is a teacher called Byron Katie. And Byron Katie has this book, and she has a book called Loving What Is. And her methodology and her approach is kind of like, it's almost like, how would you act if you have almost chosen every single situation? And that's a really hard concept to wrap your head around, and it can be very difficult to swallow. I'm not saying it's easy, but if you had to see things through that lens, you know, where would you go next? How would you proceed? And I thought that in that episode, Cheryl and Steve did a really good job of holding space for something like that. Like, there is no why, you know, there's only like now, because the present is all we have. The present is the only moment that exists, right? And I just think those things might not make you feel better, but it can prevent you from being in a perpetual slump of like self-pity, self-doubt, and just like that overall dip. And I think it can be really helpful to think about those things in really tough moments of your life. You know, when something painful happens, our natural instinct is to ask why. Like, why me? Why now? Why this? Why, God? But usually that question rarely has a satisfying answer. And often it's just an answer to kind of like soothe the pain. It's not a real answer. And if you were to shift that perspective, that anger, that grief, that fury, that rage, like why this, why now, why me, but what now? It puts you back in a place of like agency and choice and decision making amongst the stickiness, right? Agency and decision making and choices, even in the smallest way, will always make you feel a little bit more empowered. So anyways, if you are going through anything difficult, or you just want to be surrounded with some good advice, some thoughtful advice, and you just want to listen to two people go back and forth in a very empathetic way, I highly, 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 I honestly couldn't recommend it more. Dear Sugars. Okay, podcast number 2. Oh my God, we're already at number 2. Is the New York Times Modern Love. I will say that didn't start off as a podcast. New York Times Modern Love has been a column in the New York Times for many, many years. They feature love stories, and they turned it into a podcast. Again, this is another OG podcast. New York Times Modern Love podcast has been around for many years as well. I remember listening to it on my couch in Toronto in like 2014 or 2015. So it's been around for quite some time, longer than 5 years. And after they had the podcast and the success of the podcast, it did get spun off into an Amazon Prime show, I believe. I think I watched maybe 20 minutes of the first episode and I wasn't really into it, but I believe each episode is based on a modern love story. So just in case you're like, I've heard that before, it's on TV, right? No, it actually started off as a column, then a podcast, then the show. The show came after. Modern Love. It was hosted by Magna Chakrabarty. She's an amazing host, by the way. She gives the show so much life, and then they usually get artists, actors, whatever, to pick an essay that they feel drawn to, compelled to. The artist, actor, whatever, will read the essay for the podcast, and then the entertainer will chime in and say why did they choose that essay, which is also really profound. It's really nice to hear kind of what they were drawn to, and you hear some amazing famous voices. They've had like literally like almost everyone, like Angela Bassett, like they've had amazing actors read essays, and they do such a good job. The actors just really know what they're doing. But the podcast brings to life the column from the New York Times, where real people share their personal stories of love in all its complication, messy, and beautiful forms. What is really nice is that it's not just man, woman love. It's love between two people. It's like love for pets. It's love for children. It's love for family. It's love for friends. Like, they cover the multifaceted word of love so well that you are always amazed, honestly, at each essay that you listen to. And I will be honest, there is a specific episode that changed my perspective and maybe even changed my life. And it was actually a bonus episode. This is episode number 132, called Love Stories in 13 Words. And it was on May 30th, 2018. So sometimes they would ask for submissions like love stories in 100 words, love stories in maybe 50 words, I think they did one time, but they did love stories in 13 words. And you guys, first of all, the way some people write is so beautiful, like so beautiful. And every time I listen to that episode, it actually makes me emotional, because I remember being very emotional when I listened to it. It features obviously tiny love stories told in just 13 words, and they are so powerful, even though they're so brief. And I'm going to list out a few of them that just really stuck with me so you guys can kind of get the idea. I cycled 2,000 miles to see him. I waited. He didn't show. Smile, though your heart is breaking. Then key his new BMW. It helps. I regret lending you that book more than I regret the terrible sex. After 36 years, sleep does not come until cold toes touch my leg. Always laugh, especially after learning your husband took ecstasy on your first date. Older sex, lubrication for her, Cialis for him, planning, but love is love. On our first anniversary, I gave him my heart. He gave me chlamydia. The worst place to be, newly single, is at your wedding reception. As we argued in the rain, he still held an umbrella over my head. Nobody kisses the soft part of your head like your mother used to. Love is late nights out at clubs and bleary mornings packing school lunches. If you're lucky enough to have someone making your life wonderful, tell them. He was passionate, sexy, and a pastry chef. But I miss his cat. Infertility was our greatest gift. We could not have made this perfect child. Even when your daughter screams, "You're not my real mom," I'm here. Experiment. 50 Tinder men in 1 year. Surprise, found love with number 49. So the 50 Tinder men in 1 year actually wildly inspired me to do 50 first dates in 12 months. It was so poignant and brief and to the point. And I thought, wow, like what a courageous woman, what an interesting woman, what an interesting experiment. And many of you have heard me talk about that before, both on TikTok and through the podcast. But something about hearing these like condensed moments of connection that made me want to really like explore that. I was just truly inspired when I heard that. I know that Modern Love is mostly a paid subscription podcast now, but this particular episode is definitely worth seeking seeking out. It honestly just reminds you of the small moments that make up a life of love and not just romantic. As you could hear, we talked about people, there are different stories of like different ages, like parental love, obviously like pet love. You could definitely hear me get emotional through some of them because when I read them, especially like infertility was our greatest gift, we could not have made this perfect child. That one hit me right in the gut because it's so brief. I actually don't know if she is saying that us as a couple could not have made this perfect child because now she's with another man, or if it's like, this perfect child that we do have, we would have never had we not suffered from infertility to begin with. It's that one I think will always stay in my head. And the other one, even when your daughter screams, "You're not my real mom, I'm here," because woo, like, wow, that is so intense. And 13 words, guys, 13 words, and you feel all the feels. So I love Modern Love as a whole. I think it's an amazing podcast. The essays are so well written. It's a whole team at Modern Love that decides what's going to go in the column. So trust me, the essays are really good. But this one, 13-word love stories, will honestly stick with me till the day I die. So if you're interested, you know where to find it. New York Times, Modern Love. Okay, and number 1, which I probably don't really talk about this much, but it is truly like my North Star when it comes to podcasts. And this one has kind of fallen off as well. Again, it's just a woman and a mic, and she's not really uploading anymore. It was a weekly podcast that went down eventually to bi-weekly, and recently went monthly, and now it'll just kind of be like whenever she's inspired. Again, at least a decade long. And that is the Life Coach School podcast with Brooke Castillo. Where do I even begin? This is my OG podcast love. I started listening back in 2017 and I've never stopped. Like, Brooke is a certified master coach trainer, and she's the real deal. She is straightforward, no nonsense approach to personal development. Changed a lot for me and really helped me. I think that the way she approaches subjects are very frank and clear and easy to understand, but she's very honest and compassionate and also a student of life. I know about the works of Byron Katie because of her. And one thing that I love about Brooke is she can kind of learn from everyone. So from the most woo, like maybe an Abraham Hicks or Marianne Williamson, to a Byron Katie, to a Tony Robbins, and so on and so forth. And these are all big leaders and authors in the personal development space. It's so fascinating because you see Brooke's own journey while she's coaching you through your life. When she starts the podcast, she is a mother of 2 boys and she's married, and the current state of the podcast, she is divorced and her 2 sons are adults. One is playing, I think, Division 1 golf, and her other son is a student. And it's just so interesting. So you kind of watch her go from being this mother focused on her boys in school, so your typical like school run and, dealing with children that are in like day-to-day school, to being an empty nester, being divorced, running her business, having crazy goals for her business, wanting to have a $10 million business, $17 million business, wanting to grow it to a $100 million business, watching her go through the growing pains of growing the business while also being a coach and a trainer. And it's so interesting because it's not really a business podcast, but you watch her build her business and coach herself and others through the process. And her core teaching is simple, and it's really not for everyone because I can see someone maybe not loving it, but it's essentially like your thoughts create your things, your feelings drive your actions create your results, and this is the life that is created. And she has a specific model based around that. And again, it helps to take responsibility of your life in a way that I don't think is articulated as clearly as other thought leaders in the space. Another quote that she has said that has kind of always stuck with me is, "Your suffering comes from the resistance to what is." And again, it ties into what I was saying earlier, and some of Byron Katie's works is like accepting what is. If today is the start date, what happened in the past doesn't matter. It doesn't exist. Like, it's almost like if your life was given to you today, as is. Like you didn't make any of those previous decisions. You would just kind of accept them and move forward. And she talks a lot about that. And that resistance to what is what is creating your suffering. She talks a lot about buffering as well, and how we kind of buffer our way through feelings, buffer our way through over drinking, buffer our way through overeating. She also struggled with her weight and also how she looked at weight and the desire to be thin. Focusing your energy instead of complaining about what is, like accepting it and then deciding what to do next. I think that her business advice is just as good as her personal development advice, to be honest. There's a lot of body of work to go through, and you can hear her growth throughout the years, but honestly, you go to episode 1, you go to episode 20, you go to episode 50 of hundreds of episodes, and it's quality from the very beginning, honestly. If you've never heard of the Life Coach School podcast, I highly recommend it. It's really great too because her episodes are typically solo. She does sometimes do guest episodes, but her episodes are typically solo and they're not too long, and it's usually focused on one topic. I highly recommend it. I think everyone can get something from it. I remember one time when she was going through her divorce, she had this idea that she was going to date someone for 3 months. Like the both of them would just decide that no matter what, we're going to date for 3 months. Like we're going to commit to each other for 3 months. And then at the end of the 3 months, we can decide what we want to do. And I thought it was so fresh and also very vulnerable. This woman in middle age, starting over and being on dating apps for the first time in her life. Her candor with her life while also being responsible and having boundaries for her ex-husband and her sons. I think she straddles that line fantastically. If you're looking where to start with episode 100 where she shares her top 100 lessons. I think it's a really good introduction to her work, her point of view, her tone of voice, and her philosophy. Okay, and obviously I've been listening to podcasts for a very long time, so I do have some honorable mentions that I want to share that didn't make the top 5, but I do think are worth mentioning. And one is How I Built This with Guy Raz. So this is basically a podcast where they go through like a business. It could be like Apple or T3, and they basically talk with the founders how they built this. And there's honestly, there's a lot of good episodes. My favorite episodes are episode 22 with Kate and Andy Spade, RIP Kate Spade. And I love like the two of them together on the episode. They've got good energy together. Obviously, this episode was a while ago, so obviously Kate was still alive, and I believe her and Andy were either still married or at least very close. And it's a beautiful episode. Obviously, their story, turns out quite sad, but it's a beautiful episode of how they kind of built their business, and there's such a levity in their voice that is so sweet to hear. And episode 11 with Herb Keller from Southwest Airlines, again, RIP, very sad, but Herb is like very Southern, and his whiskey and his cigars and the way he talks about Southwest, it's very inspirational. And maybe it's not someone that I wouldn't necessarily like sign up and listen to if he were still around, but it is a very fascinating story, and it's just so interesting how these people have created businesses that they weren't sure were going to work out or even be around for the length that it has. And we're talking about businesses that have been around for at least 30, 40 years. So Guy is also an incredible interviewer. If you ever want to learn how to be a master interviewer, he's very good. He knows how to listen. He asks amazing questions, and he really gets to the heart of how these businesses were built. If you're into how things were built, I highly recommend. It's How I Built This with Guy Raz. Also, we have the Tim Ferriss Show. So when I think of like OG podcast, the Tim Ferriss Show, and the next one that I'll mention, which is the James Altucher Show, to me, they're like the beginning of podcasting, like as a real commitment. If you don't know who Tim Ferriss is, he is the author of The 4-Hour Workweek, which I know went viral like many, many years ago when I worked at Xerox. This was maybe like 2012. I remember that was like a pretty popular read amongst salespeople. And I actually had a coworker who was reading his book at the time, which was The 4-Hour Chef, which was basically a speed way to learn how to cook. And it really worked. This guy went from not knowing how to make anything to making steak like hot, fresh with like the butter and the rosemary. It was actually really helpful for him. I think it approaches it from a very technical way. Tim Ferriss is an incredibly thorough interviewer as well. He's another one who goes very deep with his guests. He lets them speak. He asks very thoughtful, considerate questions. Highly recommend number 136 with Naval Ravikant. This is absolutely packed with wisdom, life, business, happiness. You can also listen to some of Naval's work, methodologies, and wisdoms on life, I believe, on YouTube, but definitely where you should go next. Next up is the James Altucher Show, which I mentioned. He's another thought leader. He's been around for a very, very long time. What I love about James, at least what I remember when I used to listen to the podcast regularly, is that he never really shied away from the struggles that he had, like as a man, mental health, success, and a sense of vulnerability that wasn't really common at the time, especially from men, especially from male podcasters, that I think James does a really good job at. Episode 100 with T. Harv Eker and episode 62 with Tony Robbins, where they discuss how money is just a game. The James Show and like James Altucher as a host he's incredibly curious. He definitely does a little bit more talking than I would say like Tim Ferriss or even like Guy Raz, but you can tell like James is genuinely curious and his interest is very obvious. It makes his interviews feel almost like you're just eavesdropping on a really good conversation. They don't feel as formal and as structured, but you still take away a lot of gems. Another one is The Art of Charm. So this used to be hosted by Jordan Harbinger. This is another like OG old podcast. And Jordan went through some sort of, I think, legality issues with his co-host or business partner at the time. So The Art of Charm exists, but it's with different hosts now. And I think Jordan has his own podcast, and I don't really know all about that, but what Jordan did very well at the time was focusing and developing social skills and emotional intelligence. And again, you guys, I can't emphasize that this was back, we're talking like 2014, 2015, 2016, when these things were not buzzwords. Like no one was talking about emotional intelligence like that, especially a straight man, and developing social skills. Like people were not talking about that in great depth, like how he was. I remember him saying, you know, the power of keeping in touch with people and how every quarter he would slide to the very bottom of his iMessage and send a message to every single person from the bottom up and say, "Hi, you crossed my mind, just checking in, no need to respond." Just to kind of like let them know I'm thinking about you. I hope all is well, and like maintaining that relationship. And I thought that was so poignant and so manual labor in like the best way. And this is someone who wants a vast connection with people and knows how to maintain it and is going to do the quote unquote grunt work of sending a bunch of iMessages. And I thought it was really good. And that's what I mean, like real tips to really develop your social skills and keep in touch with people. Anyways, if you can find old episodes, I highly recommend it. It's called The Art of Charm. And then finally is the MF Project. So if you listen to this podcast, you'll probably be like, you actually listen to this? And like, it's so crazy because I used to listen to this podcast religiously. Like there was no episode of the MF Project with Andy Frisella that I did not listen to. Like absolutely not. I will say that as politics began to shift in America, when we were kind of getting out of that Obama era and we were now firmly, you know, we're out of the election cycle and we were firmly in like Trump's first term as president, I couldn't really like get down with the podcast anymore. And then he ended up migrating it into another podcast that I don't listen to because I think he wanted to talk more about politics. And I actually didn't want to listen to his views on politics, specifically very Republican politics. Like I'm just not interested and I don't really align with him politically. And the show got more political, we'll put it that way. He has a very no BS approach to business advice that I think if sometimes you're looking for that kick in the pants, fantastic. He isn't more of like your raw motivation. He is very honest, very thorough, and someone who literally built his business from the ground up. I believe he is the founder and CEO of First Form, which is like a fitness brand or supplement, something like that. But for all my TikTok girlies, he is the originator of 75 Hard. Yes, I know. It's so crazy. And for those of you that are like, what the hell is 75 Hard? 75 Hard is a methodology, weight loss, and mindset essentially like program that you do for 75 days. It's 75 days of, I believe you have to drink a bunch of water, correct me if I'm wrong, but the main shtick of it is you have to work out twice a day, once in the morning, once in the evening, and one of those workouts have to be outside. You have to read every day, and you eat clean every day. So no cheat days, no cheat meals, and no alcohol. There might be more, but I'm missing. But that's kind of the gist of it. And if you mess up on any of those days, the time starts over. They also have like 75 soft where you work out once a day and you read like, whatever. But he is the creator of that. And yeah, like his old episodes really used to hit because he is someone, like I said, who built his business from the ground up. So if you are looking for true entrepreneurial insights and just like hard hitting life insights, if that makes sense, he's also been vastly overweight and he struggled with his mental health and he struggled with his drinking and he struggled with losing weight. Like he is very, very honest. Very honest. I want to say he got shot before as well. Like, I'm telling you, this guy's lived a million lives. He's from St. Louis. I believe he still lives there. If you've ever read The 10X Rule by Grant Cardone, I know not everyone's a fan of Grant Cardone. And again, like these people are very like kind of like Republican Trump heavy now. And at the time, like their political affiliations was not as like brash. So you could kind of just appreciate the art and ignore the artist. But now they're a little bit too conflated for me. But I used to love The 10X Rule by Grant Cardone. Again, if you're an entrepreneur, if you are building something in your life, honestly, if you're trying to achieve anything in your life, personal, internal, external, whatever, I really liked The 10X Rule by Grant Cardone. I listened to it on Audible and it's something I used to listen to often. The MFCEO Project, I believe the episodes are still up. Correct me if I'm wrong. I know he has a new podcast, not into it, don't know what it's about, don't care. But if you can find old episodes, trust me, they are very good and they will give you the kick in the pants that you need. So I just want to end that none of these podcasts actually directly inspired me to create my own show, but they've all kind of massively expanded my knowledge on what is possible and what can be shared and what can be shown, especially as a woman, like figuring out love, life, career, especially as a Black woman and especially as someone who's trying to make money by being themselves and have that align as closely as possible. Each of these creators have showed me different ways to show up authentically and what that means to really build something that's meaningful, that's impactful, and most importantly, like they stood the test of time. Like these are long bodies of work, which I just really appreciate from both a producer and a consumer. They've helped me reimagine what success can look on my own terms, and all of these people have created success on their own terms, which I really appreciate and respect. I think that also what makes these podcasts stand out is their radical honesty. These hosts have shown in many different ways that they're not afraid to show up fully as themselves, and everyone that has submitted a love essay to Modern Love has bared their heart on the line. I think that also these hosts can be great listeners and they ask interesting questions and they're not afraid of out-of-the-box thinking and perspective. I've never felt like what I'm listening to is purely for clicks or views or engagement or anything like that. There's always been a very deep authenticity that cuts through all of the noise. And that's why these podcasts I've gone back to over and over and over and over again. And that's truly what makes their content so evergreen and impactful that I think you, as my listener who maybe doesn't know them from a can of paint, can still appreciate it. So there you have it. Those are the 5 podcasts that genuinely changed my life and a few honorable mentions that have really shaped me as a listener over the years. Like I said, I love podcasts. They give us access to wisdom and stories and insight and just thought leaders and thought provokers. I really, really love that. I think podcasting is such an intimate way of engaging with someone or engaging with ideas in a way that feels like it's a mentor, a trusted friend, someone that you really respect, like right in your ear. And it's a direct line of communication almost. If you guys have listened to any of these and you love them and you back me up, please let me know. But if you have a podcast that you think has changed your life, don't forget to let me know. Message me on Instagram. I'll leave all the ones that I recommended in the show notes so you can check them out, and definitely let me know what you think. Until next week, guys, have an amazing week. I love you and I will talk to you soon. Bye.